So I think it was 2 years ago I stood on this stage this very day in 2016 and I asked the question, is the uranium bull coming? I'm going to show a couple slides from that presentation I gave because there's still some similarities from that time. And there's also a lot of stark differences. Oh. So this was the chart I showed in 2016, and it said, where are we in the cycle? And uranium stocks were down 90% since January 2011. And the S&P was up 46%, and I took that to mean that we were kind of close to a bottom. But here's the same chart. This is now 2018. Yahoo has updated their platform. The chart is prettier, but the uranium stocks are not any prettier. They're still down 88%, and I think the point I want to make there is that, we had a little run in the past couple of months when the Kazakhs made the announcements that they made, and I'll cover that in a bit. Some people asked, is it too late to get in on this uranium turnaround? And I think it's very evident from this chart that it's clearly not too late to get in a uranium bull market that is coming. The equities are still very, very debased, and this is just based on the global uranium ETF URA, so it's just a basket of uranium stocks, but I think it shows clearly the upside that's potential in uranium. And so this is the core of the situation, right? The world needs 169 million pounds of uranium a year, and they produce less than that. And fundamentally, that's why I think uranium has to go up, but there's a lot of nuances in there that we have to cover. That uranium is for the 447 operating reactors in the world that are in 30 countries now, but there's a lot more coming, and this hasn't really been true in previous times in the cycle. There's 58 reactors under construction right now, 157 reactors that are on order or planned, and over twice that are proposed. So there's a big coming wave of nuclear build-out coming in various countries, especially in China. You guys have seen the slides. You've seen all the smog pictures in China. There's been reports that say breathing the air in China is like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And they need to clean the air. So what are they doing? They're building 38 reactors. They have 20 under construction, and they have plans for nearly 200 more. The other one that people talk about is India. They're doing a similar build out. They have 22 reactors now with 6 under construction, and they want 65 more. Can you guys hear me? Am I talking into the mic okay? And it's not just because of clean air. So there's a lot of other reasons that countries want to go nuclear. This is a very important headline. This is the largest oil exporting country in the world, and they want nuclear plants because they want to stop burning oil and they want to sell that oil, and also because this is baseload power. So Saudi Arabia, just in the past 2 weeks, has announced that they're getting ready for its first nuclear power build. They're building 2 plants, and they've just put out letters trying to get bids on these plants. I think it's important, right? This is the largest oil producing country in the world. They have plenty of liquid power. They want nuclear. This is another very important point. After Fukushima, a bunch of countries said that they were going to go away from nuclear. Japan obviously shut down. They're now restarting. Germany said they were going to shut down. They've been unable to do so because they can't replace it, right? That's the thing with nuclear. It's tough to replace. It's baseload. It's clean. And so Germany has not closed down as many as they said they were going to close down. France said they were going to cut from 75% reliance on nuclear electricity to 50%, and they've since backed away from that statement. And if I'll read just for a second, it says, the French government has postponed a long-held target to reduce the share of nuclear energy in the country's power production. Why? Because it could lead to supply shortages and could lead them to miss their climate accords, their greenhouse emission reduction goals. That's a global situation, folks. That's not a French situation. And so the reason is simple. Nuclear is humanity's only source of baseload and clean electricity. Solar is clean, but it's not baseload, and the same with wind. You need something for the grid that smooths it out and is also clean, and countries are increasingly realizing this. Here's a quote from the former Energy Secretary of the US. He says, abandoning nuclear would leave the nation vulnerable to environmental and strategic threats by sidelining a greenhouse emissions-free power and by weakening national security interests. That was under Obama. That was Obama's Secretary of Energy. And so here's where we are. This is the price chart. The big spike on the left here is when Cigar Lake flooded and uranium went to 130 some dollars a pound. It pulled back, it spiked back up, and then Fukushima hit, and we've been down ever since. So that's where we are right now. We're at some $23, $24 a pound after bottoming out around 17 in November, last November. And this is sort of the sector-specific things that have gone on. There was, about 400 miners in the last bull cycle. We're down to just a couple of dozen now. But none of them are making money at $23, $24 a pound uranium. But uranium continues to supply 10% of the world's electricity and 20% of the US's electricity. And in the US, it supplies 60% of the clean electricity. You can't go away from this nuclear. But you also can't mine it at $50, $60 a pound, which is the sort of like the global average to make money, and sell it for less than that. I mean, that just doesn't work. Prices have to rise. These are fundamental laws of economics, supply and demand, right? And it's specifically exacerbated in the US, where we need 50 million pounds of uranium to supply our 99 nuclear reactors, but we produce less than 2 million pounds. So that leaves the United States some 96% reliant on foreign sources of uranium. And that doesn't come a lot of times from very nice places or places that are allies with the US. I'm specifically talking about countries like Russia or Russia-influenced countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And no one is talking about this. I think it's very important that it's very, very much under the radar. If you remember a couple years back when the United States was 60% reliant on foreign oil, people were up in arms about this. We got to get off the foreign oil. We got to stop the imports from the Middle East. Well, here you got, basically some Cold War tensions resurfacing. Everybody in the US wants to bash Russia. They say they influenced the election. They say this and that. They say Trump's on board with them. But yet we're relying on 96% of our uranium, and no one is saying a thing. I think this is going to come to the fore, and I think it's one of the potentially main drivers, especially for US-based uranium companies. This is back to the core of the situation. I just wanted to remind you again that we use more uranium than we produce. And the difference has been made up by a couple of things. We know that Japan shut off their reactors, so they had some excess uranium that they were selling into the market. There's been some secondary sales from the Department of Energy. There was a program called Megatons to Megawatts that was decommissioning nuclear warheads, and we were using that uranium. A lot of those programs have come to an end. First of all, Japan is now restarting, so they're starting to sell less of their stockpile into the market. We have a new administration in Washington. Rick Perry has ended, or at least curtailed, the sales of uranium from the Department of Energy. And the Megatons to Megawatts program is over. So, and the underfeeding where they generate more in the refinement and enrichment process and sell that into the market, that's hitting price constraints now as well. So you have, I don't really like the term perfect storm, but you have all these macro factors and sector-specific factors and country-specific factors that are all pointing in a very real way to a coming bull market for uranium. And so that's the question. Is it uranium's time? And I'm not going to waffle. I think I'm going to say yes. I think the bottom is now behind us. I think that it's time to buy uranium stocks, and I think that the bull market is about to unfold. Here's where we get the uranium. So 40% from Kazakhstan and then Canada, and you see some other not so nice places in there, in Niger, Namibia, Russia, and other countries that are influenced by people that we like to consider foes, geopolitical foes. That's heavy reliance on a few suppliers. And so we played a game of chicken, right? It was like, are the utilities going to come in and buy, and is the uranium price going to go up, or are we going to cut supply? And we cut supply. The Kazakhs are cutting supply now in a big way. It says they're going to slash 20% of their output. And there's some drivers behind that. Not only are they struggling to make money at $20, $25 a pound uranium. I mean, these are low-cost producers struggling to make money. But they're also going to float an IPO of their state-owned nuclear arm, the Kazakhstan. And so they want a robust, they want a robust nuclear and uranium market when they bring those shares to trade. So what have they done? They set up a Swiss marketing arm so they can sell uranium to that, so they don't have to sell it into the market, and then the Swiss marketing arm can hold it to keep some supply from the market. And these are things that Western-based countries would do if they were going to IPO. But now the Kazakhs are very much learning, and I think that's important for the sector as a 40% supplier of the commodity that they're cutting, and they're saying, hey, wait a minute, we need prices to rise. We're going to float some shares. This is a very important catalyst. Similarly, Cameco did the same thing. And this is all recent, folks. This is past November and December. Cameco said they're going to suspend production from McArthur Mine in Saskatchewan. That's the largest producing uranium mine in the world. This isn't some podunk uranium mine that's on the fringe of profitability. They're saying, look, no more. The prices have to go up. And so I have to read again, I'm sorry. This is what Cantor Fitzgerald said after those cuts. It said, we estimate that the production suspension at Cameco's McArthur River mine and the announcement cut of 20% of production by Kazatomprom over the next 3 years amounts to 42.3 million pounds of U3O8 that are no longer coming into the market. That's a large chunk of the market. Remember, we needed like 170, 165 million pounds. That's a lot of uranium coming off the market. It's similar to when Cigar Lake flooded in 2006. That was ultimately for the catalyst for the best uranium run we've ever seen. It's the similar sort of pounds coming out of the ground. It's like shampoo, just rinse and repeat. And this really gets to the supply and demand thing. So the demand is the line at the top, the blue line, and the gray and the lighter blue below it is the production. And so you can clearly see a gap. That gap is a supply shortfall. What happens when there's a supply shortfall? Prices have to rise. And this is using $40 a pound. So this is a supply shortfall even if uranium goes up 17 bucks. I mean, it's got to go up more than 17 bucks then, right? I mean, this is arithmetic. And I'll tell you about these companies one by one in a second, but I think I want to wax on a couple of other things. Look, there's a lot of uranium out there. That's no secret. The problem is getting that uranium online. It's not like tomorrow some company can say, oh, hey, we're going to turn on the switch and we're going to produce 2, 3, 4, 10 million pounds. That's not how it works. These are 5 to 10 year cycles to get PEAs and feasibility studies done and get permits. This is a long lead time. So you're going to need the price to ramp up in a significant way, I think. To bring new supply online and to incent the discovery of new viable projects. I went down the list of companies that was here, and I jotted down some for you that I follow or that I own or that I recommend. They're in no particular order. One is called ALX Uranium. It's run by a gentleman named Warren Stanier, who also runs a company called Nevada Sunrise, and he does a good job with Nevada Sunrise. And I think he can put together a package of projects in the Athabasca Basin as well. This is very early days for ALX. Blue Sky Uranium just set up shop down in Argentina. Argentina has its own nuclear fleet that it needs to power. It has no domestic supply of uranium. So you'll see a couple companies now that have gone into South America and Argentina specifically to try to bring some uranium supply online. There's a company called Canalaska Uranium. They're a sort of a project generator. In the Athabasca Basin, they have a JV with Cameco. They're about to start drilling their main asset here soon. And all these companies are here. I think you can go talk to them. There's a company called Energy Fuels. This is the largest U.S. producer, and granted, it doesn't take much to be the largest producer in the U.S. because there's not that many of them, and the U.S. only produced about 1.6, 1.7 million pounds, but they're the largest producer. They also own the only licensed and operated mill in the United States. They have a high-grade copper asset. They can do toll milling to generate revenue, and I think they're well-funded. And they're listed on the NYSE, and that's important, folks, because you guys in this room are the ones that are ahead of the curve. I've been early in the uranium space for years, so definitely ahead of the curve. But when people start to get the bug, when the uranium stocks are going up 5 or 10% a day, people are going to want to flock to the highly liquid vehicles, I think, and the stocks that are traded on main exchanges. And so companies like Energy Fuels and UEC, which I'll talk about in a second, are going to be go-to candidates, I think. Fission Uranium is here. In fact, they're standing in the back of the room. Hi, Dev. They own the best unmined asset of any commodity in the world, not just uranium. And it's not just me saying that. That's ranked by third parties. It's 100 million pounds starting at surface. And there's a new resource estimate due out this year. There's also, I believe it's a PFS due out later this year. And what's going to happen is I think you're going to see a re-rating because it's a unique situation. The first 100 million pounds they found are in a deposit that's under a lake. And those are the pounds that are currently included in the PEA that says they can get those out of the ground at about $14 a pound, which is obviously lower than prices are right now, so a very robust project. But since they drilled off that 100 million pounds, they found another very high grade and shallow zone on land. And now the strike is incredibly long. We measure the strike in kilometers now. I don't want to make forecasts, but I think there's 150 or 200 million pounds of uranium there, and this thing is going to be a mine. Sky Harbor Resources, run by a hungry kid named Jordan Trimble. He's also a project generator with a package of assets in the Athabasca Basin that are being drilled out by themselves and also by JV partners that include the likes of Areva. So exciting projects there. Uranium Energy Corp, the NYSE-listed UEC, which has assets in the South U.S. and the Southwest U.S., fully permitted, licensed, and ready to go. They're currently idled. They're unhedged. They don't have any contracts to sell with utilities. So if the market does pick up and prices do rise, they can actually be one of the few that can head to production quickly. And the last is a newcomer called URZ Energy that was put together by some of the founders and key people in a company that did really well in the last uranium bull market called Uriners. That stock went from, I think, below $1 to something like $7 or $8, and then was taken out actually by Energy Fuels, and that asset is now producing. That Uriners team that had such a big success for shareholders in the last cycle is now back together. They have some assets in Wyoming, but they're on the hunt, I think, for something larger, a more robust flagship asset. So that's sort of a team bet right now, and also a sector bet if you think it's going up. But these are all companies that I tend to keep an eye on and that I recommend in my various newsletters. So what has Morningstar said? We expect global uranium demand to rise 40% by 2025. That's annual growth of 2.8%. And then they go on to say that 2.8% annual growth might not sound like that much, but when the copper industry underwent that growth, the copper price rose by 336%. So I just did math. And that means that the uranium price would have to equal $100 a pound. I'll continue to talk about uranium at 1 o'clock all the way on the other side in workshop number 5. I'll moderate a panel with a couple of uranium companies on it. If you want to learn more about specific companies or some of the questions I asked them, please feel free to stop by. Thank you for coming. I know I'm up against Rick Rule and Marin Katusa. I know that's stiff competition. I'm sort of the low man on that totem pole, so I appreciate you being here. You can find all my letters at outsiderclub.com. That's free, but then we will bombard you with emails to try to buy our newsletters because we have to make money. And I also own a website called Resource Doc Digest that is actually totally free. And what we do there is we just post all the best articles about the resource industry that we can find and also do exclusive interviews with management teams that we know and trust and that we think are good speculations. So feel free to check those out. 1 o'clock all the way across. We have 2 minutes if anybody has a question, though I don't know how many answers I'll have for you.